Patricia was 68 years old when she discovered that paying for her daughter's life had finally become too expensive for her own survival. Not just emotionally expensive, though that wound had been deepening for years, but literally expensive. Her blood pressure medication that month cost a little more than usual. The pharmacy told her the insurance had changed something. She'd have to choose between the pills that kept her heart stable and the grocery money she'd set aside. She stood in the drugstore fluorescent lighting, holding the prescription in one hand and doing math in her head that she'd learned to do so well it was almost automatic. The $1,200 automatic transfer to her daughter's mortgage was scheduled for 2 days from now. The $450 for the car note would follow shortly after. She was 68 years old, and she could not afford her own medication while financing her daughter's third vehicle. That was the moment Patricia understood that something had to break. She drove home to her small rental house in East Austin, a neighborhood where the old live alongside the young, where the houses get smaller and the rents stay steady, where everyone knows the value of money because nobody here has quite enough of it. The house smelled like coffee, and the sage plant she kept on the windowsill. She poured herself a glass of water at the kitchen sink. Not tea, not anything warm that might soothe her, and she sat at her small dining table with her laptop open. For 4 years, she scrolled through the banking history. $1,650 every single month. That was nearly her entire pension from 30 years of administrative work. She had survived on Social Security and the modest inheritance from her late husband, a man who had died 8 years ago, who would have been horrified to know where his life insurance money was going. She thought about the winter coat she'd been wearing since 2018. The left pocket had a hole in it. She thought about the dental appointment she'd rescheduled 3 times because she couldn't afford the copay. She thought about calling her daughter that afternoon to ask if they could go to dinner, and her daughter saying, "Oh, Mom, David and I are so busy with the new house renovation. Maybe next month?" Next month had been last month, and the month before that. It was 8:17 inches the evening when the text message arrived from her daughter, Catherine. Catherine's message was formal, clinical, written in a voice that Patricia recognized immediately as not belonging to her daughter at all. This was the voice of Catherine's husband. Marcus, a man Patricia had known for 12 years, had welcomed into her family, had quietly funded without ever asking for gratitude. "We've made the difficult decision to create distance in our relationship. Your behavior is suffocating and toxic. We need you to respect our boundaries and stop attempting to contact us. Please understand, this is final. Don't reach out again. We're done." Patricia read the message 3 times. She set the phone face down on the table. She did not cry. What moved through her body instead was something closer to clarity. In that message, she heard every cold comment from family dinners, every eye roll when she mentioned struggling financially, every time Marcus had reminded her that healthy families have boundaries, as if her love was a disease that needed treatment. The message had been sent at 8:12 p.m. from Catherine's number. But that clinical corporate language suffocating, toxic, boundaries belonged entirely to Marcus. He'd typed this message about Patricia's own daughter's phone, and Catherine had let him do it. Catherine, the girl Patricia had raised on a secretary's salary after her father left, had let her husband publicly disown her own mother in a text message. Patricia looked at the phone for 5 more minutes. Then she opened her banking app. She didn't hesitate. She navigated to recurring payments and canceled the mortgage transfer effective immediately. Then the car payment. She typed her response in a voice of complete calm. "No problem. Effective immediately. I'm discontinuing your financial support. Both transfers are canceled as of tonight." She hit send. Now here's the thing that I think matters. Patricia didn't feel rage in that moment. She felt something that might have looked like rage from the outside, but it was actually something colder and more clarifying. It was the feeling of watching a bridge burn that she'd already accepted was burning. It was the sound of a lock clicking into place inside her own chest. She set the phone down, turned off the kitchen light, and went to bed at 9:30 p.m., which was exactly her bedtime, because Patricia had become someone who honored her own needs, even while she had been financing everyone else's. What happened next was predictable. What was not predictable was how calm Patricia stayed while it happened. At 6 a.m. the next morning, Patricia's phone began to vibrate. She was already awake, already drinking coffee, already feeling lighter than she had in years. The messages came through in rapid succession, because of course they did. "Mom, what do you mean cancel? You can't cancel the mortgage. The payment is due tomorrow." Then, David is stressed. His work is starting to gain real traction. We need that money. Please don't overreact. Then, Mom, this is serious. Can you please be an adult about this? There's a word they'd used her entire life whenever Patricia had asserted any need of her own, and that word was overreact. If she asked to see her grandson on a particular weekend, she was being demanding. If she mentioned she couldn't afford to buy an expensive birthday present, she was being dramatic. When she'd said she was struggling to make ends meet, Catherine had told her to think more positively. And now, when she finally stopped financing their lives, they were calling it an overreaction. Patricia read each message while finishing her coffee. She didn't respond. Around 8 a.m., she opened her phone's settings and blocked Catherine's number. Then she blocked Marcus's. She did this calmly, without anger, the way someone might organize a drawer or return something that never belonged to her. At 8:47 a.m., there was a knock on her front door that was not gentle. Patricia looked through the peephole. Catherine stood on the porch with her arms wrapped around herself, looking pale and frantic. Next to her was Marcus, his jaw clenched so tightly she could see the tension in his face from the other side of the door. Behind them was their enormous SUV, the one that Patricia had made possible by paying for a 2-year lease on top of everything else. Patricia opened the door but did not step aside. Mom, why are you ignoring my calls? Catherine's voice was high and panicked. She looked like she hadn't slept. She probably hadn't slept, because the mortgage was due in 6 hours, and she just realized that Patricia wasn't bluffing. You requested distance, Patricia said, keeping her voice level. I'm honoring that request. Marcus's face reddened. This is insane, Patricia. You're punishing Sarah because we asked for healthy boundaries. That's exactly the kind of controlling behavior we've been talking about. But Patricia wasn't listening to him anymore. Something had shifted inside her. For 12 years, she'd listened to Marcus reframe her love as control, her concern as toxicity, her presence as suffocation. But standing in her own doorway, looking at her daughter's panicked face and her son-in-law's rage, Patricia finally saw the story for what it actually was. They had spent 4 years slowly convincing her that caring about her own grandchild was selfish. They had spent 4 years telling her that financial security was more important than her presence. And they had spent 4 years taking her entire pension while instructing her that her neediness was the problem. Patricia looked directly at Marcus. I can afford to pay for your house, or I can afford to pay for my medication. I chose my medication. That is not controlling. That is self-preservation. You're destroying our lives, Catherine whispered. Patricia felt something in her chest, a tiny edge of the old guilt, the old maternal instinct to soothe, to fix, to sacrifice more. But she was tired. She was so tired. You have a house and a car and a business, Patricia said quietly. You are adults. If you cannot maintain those things without your mother's pension, then you need to stop buying things you cannot afford. Marcus stepped forward slightly, his face a mask of righteous anger. You think you're a martyr. You've always thought you were a martyr. Taking care of family isn't something you get credit for. It's just what you do. And maybe he was right. Maybe taking care of family was what you did. But what you didn't do was raise your children to believe that their grandmother was an ATM with a guilt complex. What you didn't do was tell your own mother that she was suffocating, then expect her to keep the electricity on. Patricia reached out and unhooked her spare house key from Catherine's keychain. Catherine was too shocked to pull away. Patricia set it on the side table inside the door. Have a good day, Patricia said. Then she closed the door quietly, locked it, and engaged the deadbolt. From the other side of the door, she heard Marcus curse loudly. She heard their footsteps retreat down the walkway. She heard their SUV start in her driveway. And she sat on the edge of her couch in her small rental house in East Austin and felt something that had been missing for years: peace. I need to tell you something about what I witnessed in that moment, because I think this is important. Patricia had just set a boundary. But more than that, Patricia had chosen herself, and in a culture that teaches women, especially mothers, that self-sacrifice is the highest virtue, that choosing yourself is the deepest betrayal, what Patricia did was radical. If you've ever been in a situation where someone accused you of being selfish the moment you stopped abandoning yourself, you know exactly what Patricia was experiencing. That moment when you say no, and the other person responds as if you've committed a terrible crime. The guilt that floods your body, even though you're right. Even though you know you're right. Especially because you know you're right. Patricia sat with that feeling for about an hour. Then she got up and made a list. She was going to untangle her life from theirs completely. No half measures. No part of her resources, her time, or her identity was going to be tied to people who saw her as a problem. The following Tuesday, Patricia walked into an AT&T store in downtown Austin. The young woman behind the counter's name was Riley. Patricia pointed to 3 phone lines on her account, her own, Catherine's, and Marcus's. "I need to remove these 2 lines from my account," Patricia said. "I am no longer responsible for their service." Riley looked sympathetic. "I can move them to their own account, but there's remaining balance on those 2 iPhone upgrades. Someone will need to assume liability." "I will not be assuming liability," Patricia said firmly. "If you must, disconnect the lines entirely, but I am removing myself as the account holder today." It took 45 minutes, a fee of $125, and some paperwork, but Patricia walked out of that store with only 1 phone line in her name. Her monthly bill dropped from $180 to $35. She felt lighter with each step toward her car. That afternoon, from the parking lot, Patricia changed the passwords on Netflix, Hulu, and Amazon Prime. She selected Sign out of all devices. When Marcus tried to play a show that evening, the stream would cut off. His business call, the one he'd been so concerned about last week, would have to happen without background music. Patricia's landline rang at 6 p.m. It was Marcus, his voice sharp with panic. "Patricia, our phones just lost service. I'm in the middle of a client meeting." "What did you do?" Patricia listened to him without responding. "And our Netflix is asking for a password." "Did you do this? Call me back. This isn't funny." Patricia erased the voicemail. She walked to her kitchen and began preparing dinner for one. That evening, she made pasta with fresh tomatoes from the garden she'd neglected for 4 years while paying for Catherine's renovations. There was one more thing, though. 3 months ago, when Catherine and Marcus had decided to convert their garage into a home gym, they'd asked if they could store some boxes in Patricia's rented storage unit across town just temporarily. They'd said, just until they organized their space. Patricia drove to that storage unit the following afternoon. When she rolled open the metal door, her breath caught. The unit was crammed nearly to the ceiling with their possessions. Kayaks they'd never used. Designer baby furniture from her grandson's infancy. Boxes of it, though Leo was 8 years old now. Stacks of home decor they swapped out seasonally. And towers of Marcus's failed business inventory candles that hadn't sold. Essential oils that had expired. Marketing materials from a venture that had closed 2 years ago. In the back corner, pushed to the far wall, were her own belongings. Her late husband's tool chest, which she'd stored there to keep it safe. Her boxes of winter clothes. A few pieces of furniture from before her life had become about financing other people. Patricia was paying $150 a month to warehouse her daughter's clutter. She walked to the front office and told the manager she was closing her account, effective immediately. "But you have 6 months left on the lease," the manager said. "I know," Patricia replied. "I'm paid through February. I'm giving notice for March 1st. For $50, 2 young men who worked on the property helped Patricia load her husband's tools and her winter belongings into the back of her car. They left everything else exactly where it was. The kayaks, the baby furniture, the failed business dream. That evening, Patricia unblocked Catherine's number just long enough to send one message. "I've closed the storage unit on Riverside Drive. It's paid through the end of February. After that, you'll need to sign a new lease or arrange for your items to be removed. The key is with the manager." Then she blocked her again. 2 weeks passed. November arrived with a sharp, beautiful cold. The trees in Patricia's neighborhood turned gold and rust-colored, and the morning sky was that particular shade of clear blue that makes you want to stay alive. And then came the email from Catherine. The subject line read, "Thanksgiving." Patricia opened it while sitting on her porch with her morning coffee. The email was formal, almost administrative. "Mom, David's parents are flying in for Thanksgiving. We're hosting a small gathering at our house. We know cooking isn't your favorite, but you've always done Thanksgiving beautifully. Could you prepare the turkey, stuffing, and sides and drop them off by 2 p.m. on Thursday? We want to keep it an intimate gathering with his parents, but we'd really appreciate your help with the food. You can leave it at the kitchen door. Thanks for understanding." Patricia read it twice. She didn't feel rage. What she felt was something closer to wonder at the sheer entitlement of it. They didn't want her at the table. they wanted her labor. They wanted her to cook a 12-pound organic turkey, the kind of turkey Catherine insisted on, the kind that cost nearly $70, and deliver it like a caterer. They wanted the presentation of a family holiday, without the inconvenience of actually including her in it. Patricia thought about something. Her neighbor, an older woman named Rose who lived 2 houses down, had said to her months ago, "You've raised your daughter to believe that your love is something she deserves, not something she can lose." Patricia clicked reply and typed 2 words. "Not possible." She closed her laptop. She walked down the street to Rose's house and knocked on her door. Rose answered wearing a green apron and smelling like cinnamon. She had kind eyes and a direct way of speaking that Patricia appreciated. "Rose, what are you doing for Thanksgiving?" Patricia asked. Rose smiled. "My daughter's in San Antonio this year. I was thinking of doing something simple. Maybe a small chicken instead of the whole production." "Would you want company?" Patricia asked. "I would love company," Rose said. Thanksgiving morning, Patricia slept until 7, which felt luxurious, which felt like rebellion. She spent the morning watching the parade in her pajamas, while drinking coffee that had gone cold and reheating it twice. Around noon, she peeled apples for a pie. She didn't rush. She let the kitchen fill with the smell of butter and sugar and cinnamon, which is to say she let her own house smell like the holiday, not someone else's. At 1:30 p.m., she walked over to Rose's house carrying a pie with a beautiful crust she'd taken time to make properly. Rose had set a small table by her front window. There were candles. There was actual cloth napkins. There was a small roasted chicken with herbs and lemon, and sides that Rose had made with care, not obligation. They poured white wine at 2 in the afternoon, which felt decadent and wonderful. At 2:15 p.m., Patricia's phone rang. She didn't recognize the number, but she knew who it was. Catherine or Marcus had called from a blocked line. She let it go to voicemail. 10 minutes later, another call. She let it go to voicemail again. Rose raised an eyebrow. "Let me guess. They remembered they need something from you." "Probably around about now," Patricia said quietly. When they realized nobody was cooking, Patricia checked the voicemail after dinner. Catherine's voice was shaky, panicked, barely recognizing itself as Catherine's voice at all. "Mom, where are you? David's parents are here. We don't have any food. You always cook the turkey." I thought when you said not possible, you meant you couldn't do it today, not that you were refusing." "We don't have anything." "Mom, you're ruining this." "I can't. David's mom is going to think we're incompetent. Please call me back." Patricia listened to the message while Rose was pouring dessert wine. Then Patricia laughed. It was a real laugh, surprised and genuine. "She really thought my no was a negotiation," Patricia said to Rose. "Of course she did," Rose replied. "Because for your entire life, you've renegotiated. You've found ways. You've sacrificed. She's been trained to believe that your boundaries are flexible because her boundaries are the only ones that count." Patricia didn't call back. She didn't send a text. She turned her phone on silent and helped Rose with the dishes. And now I need to pause and talk about something that I think people get wrong about stories like this. When Patricia refused to cook Thanksgiving, when she let her daughter's holiday fall apart, she wasn't being cruel. She wasn't being vengeful. She was being consistent. She had said no. Catherine had chosen not to believe her. Those are 2 different things, and the difference matters. Patricia wasn't responsible for her daughter's disbelief in her own autonomy. Most of us, if we're being honest, have been Catherine. We've assumed that no means convince me otherwise. We've bargained and negotiated and found ways to make exceptions, telling ourselves we were being flexible when really we were just abandoning ourselves again. Patricia had made a different choice, and she was living with the consequences of that choice, which is what happens when you finally stop sacrificing. The Monday after Thanksgiving, Marcus showed up at Patricia's house unannounced. Patricia was in her front garden doing some clearing when his car pulled into her driveway. He got out fast, his face already red, his whole body vibrating with rage in a way that might have frightened her a year ago. "You humiliated us," Marcus said, not bothering with a greeting. "My parents think we're incompetent. We had to order Chinese takeout on Thanksgiving." Chinese takeout. Patricia kept working in her garden. She didn't look at him. "Good morning, Marcus," she said. "Don't give me that polite routine." He stepped closer. "You knew exactly what you were doing. You ruined our holiday on purpose. Patricia set down her gardening shears. She stood up. She looked at him, really looked at him. And what she saw was not a monster. What she saw was a man in his mid-40s who had never heard the word no and didn't know how to process it. He was like a child who'd been handed something he'd broken and expected an adult to fix it. I said no, Patricia said quietly. You didn't believe me. That's not revenge. That's the consequence of not believing people when they tell you who they are and what they will and won't do. Marcus's face went purple. You ruined our credit. The mortgage bounced because we didn't have money moved in time. We're going to have a late payment on our record now. Do you understand what that does to our financial situation? And there, right there, Patricia understood something that shifted how she saw the entire situation. The mortgage payment that had bounced wasn't due to her refusal. It was due to the fact that they had come to depend so entirely on her financial support that they had no money of their own. They had spent 4 years spending money they didn't have, secure in the knowledge that Patricia's pension would cover the gap. They had built a lifestyle on the assumption of her sacrifice. The mortgage payment is due because you spent 4 years spending money you didn't earn, Patricia said. She heard her own voice, steady and clear. I paid for your house and your car and your renovations while I was buying store-brand groceries and wearing a coat with a hole in the pocket. You want to know what I understand, Marcus? I understand that I was foolish. But that ends now. Marcus took a step toward her. We are family. You're supposed to help family. You sent me a message telling me I was suffocating and toxic, Patricia said. You told me not to contact you again. You told me you were done with me. And then, when I honored that request, you arrived at my door, acting like I was the villain. So let me be clear about what I understand. I understand that I have spent 68 years trying to be enough for people who will never find me worthy. And I'm finished. I'm finished. She walked past him toward her house. He called after her. I'm telling you, if you don't fix this, I'm coming back. I'm not done with this. Patricia paused at her door. She turned around. I'm removing my name as co-signer on your car loan this afternoon. I've already spoken to the bank. Since the payments have been made on time, they've agreed to release me from liability. You'll receive the paperwork in the mail. Your interest rate will likely increase significantly, but that's not my problem anymore. She closed the door, she locked it, and she never saw Marcus at her house again. 6 months later, spring bloomed across Austin like someone had turned on all the lights at once. The Texas wildflowers erupted in fields of bluebonnets and Indian paintbrush. Patricia's backyard came alive with the garden she'd started letting die, and now she was resurrecting it with her own hands. The money she'd been sending to Catherine, that $1,650 every month, she began spending on herself. Not lavishly. Patricia had never been someone who knew how to be lavish. But she hired someone to fix the guest room window that had been broken for 3 years. She bought a new winter coat. It had a pocket without a hole in it. She booked a 10-day bus tour of the Grand Canyon for the fall. And she got a spot in a group of older women who were traveling alone by choice, not by circumstance. Her doctor was amazed at her checkup. Patricia, your blood pressure is perfectly normal. Your stress levels have dropped significantly. Whatever you're doing, keep doing it. Patricia didn't tell her doctor that what she was doing was refusing to set herself on fire to keep other people warm, but there was an ache that didn't go away. Her grandson, Leo, was 8 years old now. She hadn't seen him in 8 months. She thought about him often, about his laugh, about the way he used to hold her hand. She thought about the fact that Catherine was using him as leverage, keeping him away because Patricia wouldn't fund her lifestyle anymore. And Patricia made a decision about that. She decided that she would wait. She would wait until Leo was old enough to contact her on his own. She would wait until he was old enough to wonder why his grandmother wasn't at Christmas, why she didn't come to his birthday parties. She would wait until he was old enough to make his own choice about having a relationship with her. Because if she surrendered now, if she swallowed her pride and crawled back to Catherine's door with an apology and her wallet open, she would be teaching Leo that love means accepting abuse. She would be teaching him that the people who care about you should be willing to sacrifice themselves completely, with no regard for their own survival. She loved her grandson enough to wait for him to grow up. One Tuesday evening in May, Patricia was sitting on her back porch reading a book when her phone chimed. It was a text message from Catherine. Patricia felt her stomach drop, the way your body responds to an emergency before your mind catches up. Things have been really hard. David had to sell the SUV. We're downsizing the house. I miss you. I'm sorry for everything. Can we go back to the way things were, please? Patricia set the phone down. She let herself feel the sadness of it, the sadness of the daughter she wished Catherine was, the daughter who would have reflected on her own behavior, who would have genuinely reckoned with the damage she'd caused. But Catherine hadn't done that. Catherine had become desperate enough that sentiment was convenient again. Patricia picked up the phone. She typed slowly, ensuring that every word was deliberate and true. I'm sorry you're struggling, Catherine. I truly am. But we cannot go back to the way things were. The way things were meant I was sacrificing my own health and security for people who saw me as a burden. I am finally living my own life, and I will not finance yours. I wish you the best. I hope you figure things out. Patricia hit send. She didn't block Catherine's number this time. She didn't need to. Catherine was no longer inside Patricia's life, whether her number was active or blocked. She set the phone face down on the patio table. She picked up her book. She turned the page. And in that small moment, in that quiet, ordinary act of turning a page, Patricia was choosing her own story. She was the narrator now. She was the protagonist. She was finally, after 68 years, the person at the center of her own life. Let me tell you why this story matters. It's not because Patricia won. It's not because Marcus and Catherine suffered consequences. It's because Patricia chose herself, and because that choice, that simple, radical, deeply unfeminine choice, was the most honest thing she could have done. We live in a world that teaches mothers and grandmothers and women in general that love is measured in sacrifice, that we should give until we have nothing left, that our value is in what we provide, not in who we are. Patricia's story dismantles that narrative entirely. It says that self-preservation is not selfishness. It says that boundaries are not cold. It says that sometimes the most loving thing you can do for someone is to refuse to enable their damage. If you have ever been in a situation where someone called you selfish for taking care of your own basic needs, you know exactly what Patricia experienced. If you have ever felt the guilt of saying no, the weight of someone else's disappointment landing on your shoulders, the terrible fear that choosing yourself means you don't love your family enough, Patricia's story is for you. Here's what I want you to sit with. What would happen if you started honoring your own no, the way Patricia did? What would happen if you stopped negotiating with people who had already shown you who they were? What relationship in your life has become a transaction instead of a connection? And what would it feel like to step back from financing someone else's life, even for just 1 month? Patricia's story teaches us something that's almost dangerous to say out loud in our culture. Your love is not a renewable resource that other people have a right to. Your sacrifice does not obligate them to be grateful. Your generosity does not give you a claim on their behavior. You can love someone and still refuse to set yourself on fire for them. So here's what I want to know. Comment in the section below and tell me. Are you Patricia, standing in the kitchen realizing you've been financing your own erasure? Or are you somewhere in the middle, still trying to figure out if saying no makes you a bad person? Or maybe you've already learned Patricia's lesson and you're living differently now. I want to hear from you. And tell me where you're watching from. What time is it there? What's the temperature like outside your window? Are you in a place where people understand what it means to finally choose yourself? Or are you in a place where that choice still feels like betrayal? I'm curious about your world. If this story resonated with you, please subscribe. There are more stories like this coming, stories about people who stopped abandoning themselves, who drew lines that other people hated, who discovered that their own lives were worth living. Subscribe so you don't miss them. This is a fictional story inspired by real emotional experiences, fully rewritten and reimagined in Austin, Texas, to create original content. Any resemblance to real people or events is coincidental.